Well, hello again, and welcome to episode number 3 of the Wyoming Hunting Guide video hunting blog. I'm your host. My name is Lucky. In the last few videos, we led up to what today's video is about, which is choosing a deer hunting area here in Wyoming. Wyoming is divided into right at 170 different deer hunting areas. Of those areas, it's divided into 15 regions and 22 limited quota areas. First thing I'd like to do is explain to you the difference between regions and limited quota. Limited quota areas, as I said, there are only 22 of them, are areas where both residents and non-residents must apply in a lottery drawing system for those permits. There are a limited number of those permits available, and we have to draw those on a lottery basis. The other option is to go with a region tag. Now, region tags are available to non-residents, and it allows them to hunt 4 or 5 different areas, and in those 4 or 5 areas they're allowed to go into each one of those areas, whereas a limited quota permit, you're only allowed to hunt in that particular area. Region tags are what we locals like to refer to as a general hunting license. As a local hunter, I can go out and buy a general over-the-counter hunting license, and it allows me as a resident to go out and hunt every one of those 15 different regions and all the areas in those regions. It's not limited entry, it's not limited quota, it's an unlimited amount of licenses. They'll sell those until people quit buying them. The benefit to you as a non-resident is it allows you to hunt 4 or 5 different areas in one season. The trade-off there is that you're out there with all the residents and all the non-residents who basically decided to put in for that, and the residents who decided to go buy the tag over the counter. You do still have to draw for those in a lottery drawing as a non-resident, but more often than not, there are leftover region tags still available after the initial draw. That seems to be the case just about every year. I won't say every year, but just about every year. Some regions, the real popular regions, sell out quicker, so they're not always available. The benefit of a limited quota draw is in that singular area, the Game and Fish may only issue 200 or 300 licenses, and in some areas it's only 20 or 30 licenses. So when you come out to hunt, you'll be in that area with only 20 or 30 different hunters, or 200 or 300 different hunters, versus 2,000 or 3,000 in a region area. So that's the trade-off. That's not to say that the region areas can't grow great big bucks. They do. But the limited quota areas seem to be managed a little bit better, a little tighter numbers, so they tend to grow larger, better quality deer in those areas. One of the things I will caution you as you decide to choose an area is on the western and northern parts of our state, over in what I call the big country, there are wilderness areas. Now, these wilderness areas have clear-cut defined boundaries. If you're a non-resident hunting in those areas, you are required to have a resident guide. That doesn't say that you're required to pay a resident guide, but you have to have a resident who has been a resident for the past year accompany you while you're up there hunting. You don't have to pay them. There is a licensing process that they go through, but that you are required to have a resident guide in the wilderness areas. That's plainly stated on all the literature from the Wyoming Game and Fish. One of the other things that you may want to consider when you're drawing a license is drawing odds. What are the odds of you drawing a limited quota tag, or what are the odds of you drawing a region tag? Those odds can be found at http://gf.state.wy.us. I'm going to try to get a link up right here below the video to that. That's the Wyoming Game and Fish website. And then you go into, on the left-hand side, Hunting Home, and then you go into Drawing Odds, and then in the Drawing Odds, it'll allow you to look, and it'll ask you if you want to look at the random draw, it'll ask you if you want to look at the preference draw, or it'll ask you if you want to look at the special draw. Now, the random draw is people who paid the standard price for an application for a license, which is $312 for a non-resident deer tag, and they have no preference points built up. Those people are in with everybody else. So those people with the preference points, or with no preference points rather, pardon me, with no preference points, they have the same chance as everybody else in that pool for their $312. Now then, once you've applied and been unsuccessful in your first choice for your deer, then if you put in the next year, you would have accumulated 1 preference point. Or you can buy a preference point starting in July. Once you have a preference point, then you go into the preference draw. The price is still the same, $312, but the difference is you now have a preference point and you're only competing with people who have 1 preference point or greater than 1 preference point. There may be people who have put in for 2 or 3 years who have 2 and 3 preference points, but the odds get better the longer you go. Now, the other option is to apply for a special deer tag. The price of a special deer tag is $552, but they take 25% of all of the non-resident license and put them in the special pool, and then they draw only out of that pool of hunters who paid the extra money, the $552 total, to be in that special draw. So that increases your odds significantly, and you can see that. I'm going to put a link up for the Game and Fish, but that's under drawing odds. So you can see, and once you open those up, you'll see how many people applied, what the quota was, and how many people drew. It gives you an idea, a really good idea, of what the popular areas are. Popular areas don't necessarily mean that they produce big trophy deer, but it certainly helps. The other thing that you can do on that is view the leftover licenses. Right now is a great time to view those because it'll tell you something. If you go into that same URL that I'm going to post down below, and you go into View 2010 Leftover Licenses, there will be a little, you click on that, there will be a little drop-down menu that says Species, and you of course put in deer, and then you check the quota. What you're going to see is all the way down the left side of that, there's going to be a big long list of deer areas, and there will be a red asterisk in front of a lot of those. What will happen is at the bottom of the screen, it'll tell you that the asterisk means that those are areas with difficult access for public use. Are there deer in those areas? Yes, but what they're saying is there's a lot of private land that locks up the public land, so you better make sure that you have permission to hunt in those areas from a private landowner, or you know your way around before you get those. Some of those areas, there's a lot of public land, and if you don't mind working a little bit and walking around the private land, you can certainly get in there and make something happen. So that's something else. But as you look at those leftover licenses, you can see the areas that maybe aren't as popular, and that should tell you something because people aren't putting in for those for one reason or another. So those leftover licenses that are up right now, you can tend to stay away from those and be doing yourself a great big favor. See the licenses where the quotas or the number of licenses they give out are relatively small. That's going to reduce your hunting pressure. That's going to increase your likelihood of having a better deer to hunter ratio, and ultimately increase your success when it comes time to be out there hunting. So those are just a few things that we can talk about, that we talked about today, that will help you out in your deer hunting selection, your area selection. And we'll cover some more in future episodes, but unfortunately I've got to keep these short. I've got to keep them under 10 minutes, otherwise YouTube doesn't like me. So once again, I'm your host, Lucky, and I'm reminding you that Christians call what we do fellowship, yuppies call it bonding, but we hunters, we just call it hunting.